just give it a good 10 count. And put it down and start anytime.
My name is Joshua Gortler, and I'm a Holocaust survivor. It's only recently, in the last 5 years, or less than 5 years, that I began to tell my story. It actually started with my grandchildren. They started to ask me questions, where I was, what happened to me, and then I began to share my story with them. My oldest grandson, who's 21 now, was fascinated. And we would start a story, and he would know exactly where we stopped and continued the next day. And then I got involved with the Holocaust Educational Center, and I am going around through the community to tell my story to mostly to teenagers and young adults in crisis. I've done some stories at prisons, I've done some stories at homeless shelters, and hopefully that people could learn from the past and not to do the same mistakes in the future. Especially today, as we listen to the news and pick up a newspaper, and more people talk about the denial of that period of time. And that comes to mind in the book of Ecclesiastes, where Solomon discusses there's a time for everything. And I'd like to read a couple of paragraphs, and kind of this gave me the impetus to talk about my own story. King Solomon writes in the book of Koheles, Ecclesiastes, and it became at one time a famous song. There's a season for everything. Eis la'ahov ve'eis l'snoa. There's a time for love and there's a time for hate. Eis milchama ve'eis shalom. There's a time for war and a time for peace. Eis lachshov ve'eis ledaber. There's a time to think and there's a time to talk. And I feel now is the time to talk and retell these stories for the future generations to come. Because if we don't learn from the past, we will do the same mistakes in the future. I was born in a small town in Poland. High tech? Not going anywhere. Here we go. I was born in a small town in Poland. The name of the town was Tomaszów Lubelski. My family has been in Tomaszów for close to over 100 years. Established family. Family was in the lumber business. Well respected, learned family. My grandfather, Yaakov, was the chief rabbi. He was a rabbi, a dayan, a judge. And I remember I was only 3 years at the time, but certain images come back to you. All of us were gathered, left our homes, comfortable homes, and gathered into the courtyard of the synagogue. One of the identification tags that all of us had to wear, young, old, and in between, is a yellow Jewish star with the name of Judah, meaning a Jew. Most of us, of course I was a child, but my parents told me that we had to make these stars by ourselves and to be worn all the times in public. Tomaszów, before the World War II, was a nice little community. It's been there for many, many years. When the Nazis arrived into Tomashov, all of us had to leave our homes into the courtyard of the synagogue. My grandfather, as I mentioned, who was the rabbi of the town, was extremely religious. And it came to, in the morning, to say morning prayers, and Jews, Orthodox Jews around the world, even today, put on a prayer shawl and tefillin on their arms and on their head. My grandfather refused to put on the talis and the tefillin because there were women in the same general area. So he asked the women to leave the courtyard. And of course, everybody says, no, we cannot leave, it's too dangerous. So he left the courtyard. That's the last time that he was seen. The next time people reported seeing my grandfather was hanging from a tree with his feet up and his face down, dead. That is the image that I have of the first days of the war in 1939 in Tomaszów, Poland. It is an image that haunts me even today as I think and I talk about that particular period. I see how my grandfather felt when he had to leave the courtyard and he put on the talis and tefillin, and I'm sure he recited the Shema, the Jewish prayer, as he left this earth. What happened in 1939 is not an instant in history. That moment that occurred in 1939 developed many, many years before. And that was the rise of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a disease of hatred without any cause to it. Kristallnacht, the breaking of the glass. Here we see an image where the Nazis came in and broke every piece of glass on establishments that belonged to the Jewish people. Hatred is also what you can do and you cannot do. Here we can see an image that a dog had more rights than a Jew at that particular time. A dog could sit on a bench, but that bench was reserved for Aryans only for people of a certain look and a certain behavior. But a Jew was discriminated against. He could not do that. Stores in Germany and in Poland as well had signs that Jews were not permitted to enter in certain places. Kristallnacht was the beginning of the hatred that boiled over and created what is known today as the Holocaust. Jews were not permitted to ride the same trains as the Germans. Segregation. Segregation was not very uncommon in the United States as well. I remember when I came to this country in 1951, first time that I began to see segregation in the United States as well. After a year in Phoenix, and I'll talk a little bit later on about that, I was sent by my parents to go to school in New York by bus. And I realized that in the back of the bus was reserved for people of color, and the front of the bus was reserved for the white. Buses did not have bathrooms at the time. So every few hours the bus would stop, and the first time I got off and I saw one bathroom was a big line, and in the other bathroom there was no lines at all. So I wanted to go to the other bathroom. And people stopped me and they said, wait, you can't go to the other bathroom. That's for colored people, and you're not colored. So I began to see, even in these United States, discrimination was very, very open and practiced. As part of Hitler's plan was to dehumanize the Jews. And here we see an image of one Jew cutting the next Jew's beard off. And the people in the background are laughing and enjoying the scene to see how we are humiliated. A scene of deportation. Once we were in the courtyard of Tomashov. That was a very short period of time. It was a matter of days where the Germans had a bigger plan what to do with the Jews. We began to deport from Tomashov to Zamość. Zamość was the ghetto that we were gathered to. And how did we get there? We got there by certain train. I like to point out this particular picture because it has special meaning to me. This picture of a young child, which is about a little bit older, 2 years older than I was at the time, because I know this young man. This young man was a roommate of mine at Yeshiva University. His name is Zvi Nussbaum. And Zvi Nussbaum's picture was shot at a time, and it became known the world over. There are some other people who claim that they were this child in the picture, but Zvi told me, and he had information that that was him at the time. Zvi, as I mentioned, it was my roommate at Yeshiva University, the college that I attended, and he became a physician, and Zvi lives now in Israel, and he's a practicing physician, and he will be retiring next year.
Going out.
A scene. It's wintertime, and this is what it looked like. Jews carrying their own baggage, their own packs for deportation. This is the Kovna ghetto. I couldn't get a picture of the Zamość ghetto that we were in. We were herded into cattle cars, and I remember those cattle cars very, very, very well. There must have been 100+ people, standing room only. No sanitation of any kind in these cattle cars. When a person had to relieve themselves, somebody would take off a coat or a blanket, and to create a little bit of privacy for someone to be able to relieve their bodily needs, and then the feces, the urine, was thrown out through the windows. For days, we were in those cattle cars. The cattle car would stop for a few hours. Some stale bread was thrown into the cattle car for us to eat. Potatoes, peeled potatoes, raw or a little bit boiled, and that was the diet we were on. Moving from Tomashov to the ghetto of Zamość. Here we see a cattle car, what it looked like, and there's another image of it, what it looked like in the inside of the deportation transport that we were on, going from Tomashov to the ghetto. When we talk about Holocaust survivors, there are three levels of people who survived that period of time. People who were in the concentration camps or the extermination camps, those people sort of are on the top of the list of the survivors because their lives are unbelievable how they managed. The second group of survivors were people who were hiding in the woods or hiding in Gentiles' home. And the third group of survivors was those people who escaped Poland at the time and moved on to Russia. I was one of those people who moved from Poland into the Soviet Union at the time during the period of the Holocaust. We were in the Zamość ghetto for a short period of time. My parents and grandparents and great-grandparents were in the lumber business. And my father had many connections with the outside world, with the people of the surrounding areas. And one night, a Mr. Kowalski, who was a associate of my father's, he and two other men came in the middle of the night and helped us escape the ghetto, and we were hiding with Mr. Kowalski for a short period of time as a child. And my parents were in the underground. Poland, the part of Poland that we were on, changed hands a number of times between Poland and Russia. And the Russian army came in and out of that particular part of Poland. And one day when they came in, my parents gathered myself, my brother, a few other families, and we escaped from Poland with the Russian army. And we did quite a bit of traveling. Again, the cattle cars were the means of transportation that moved us from Poland into Siberia. In Siberia, and if you look at this map, you can see from Poland, we went all the way down to Siberia. My parents were slave laborers in Siberia. The prime occupation in Siberia was cutting lumber and working with woods. That was not new to my parents, since they knew this type of business from before. My father was a foreman in Siberia, and we were there doing a good portion of the Holocaust, Second World War. As the Germans began to move towards Russia, the Russians were not very accepting of these Jewish slave laborers and were afraid that perhaps the Jews will rise up and fight with the Nazis against the Russian population. So they tried to ship us from Siberia as far as possible away from the front, from the German front. So once again, into the cattle cars we went, and the train rides began again from Siberia to a place that was totally unknown to any one of us, and that was Tashkent, Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, all of these parts of the world were part of Russia. And as cold as it was in Siberia, Uzbekistan was the opposite. Tashkent was extremely, extremely hot. And the diseases that we were encountered with at the time were unbearable. I remember suffering from malaria. Malaria is a disease that when it first begins, the onset of the symptoms are such that no matter how many blankets and how many overcoats you put on, you shiver, and then all of a sudden you turn into extreme opposite. High temperatures 105, 107, 108, convulsions. And I remember as a young child going from being very, very cold to being extremely, extremely hot. Education was not known for any one of us. So during that period of time, as a young child living both in Siberia and then in Tashkent, I had no formal education. Food consisted of boiled potatoes, and the first time I was introduced to a new type of food called corn. In Russia it was called kukuruza. We would pick the corn raw and eat it. That was the diet. The living condition was a hut. I remember there was nothing on the floor except the ground, and no toilet facilities. If you had to relieve yourself, you had to go outside. We slept on straw, or some of the corn was very, very popular at that time. So we would cut up the corn after the harvest, and that's what we slept on, winter and summer. The nights, extremely cold. The days, extremely hot. How we survived that time, impossible to think of. There was one instance that I remember as a child. Even in that particular part of the world, I remember birth of a child. My mother, who had no experiences in delivering a child, I remember her delivering a baby boy. I was outside of that little hut and listening in as the screams of this young woman who gave birth. My mother had an old scissor. I have no idea how she had it with her. And she cut the umbilical cord of that child, and new life came into the world. Even under these circumstances, new life was there. My father worked in a bakery, and that was a lifesaver because we were fortunate. We in Tashkent area were able to get periodically a slice of bread. And a slice of bread was all you needed to survive, other than the boiled potatoes and the corn. The war ended, and we needed to get home. My parents thought, wonderful, we are going to go back to Poland and establish ourselves again. So again, we traveled from Siberia down back to Poland. The Poles did not welcome us with open arms. As a matter of fact, they looked at us as foreigners. What are we doing back in Tomaszów? My father was a very smart businessman, and unbeknown to me at the time, I was still a young child, he and a few other individuals said, okay, we're going to restart the lumber business. And as restarting the lumber business, they needed some trucks. And among the trucks they got was a gasoline truck. And one day I remember 3 families got into the tanker. The tanker was empty. There were some holes made in the tank for air, and we left Tomaszów towards the west, and we went to Berlin, Germany. I want to regress for a second. About 6 years ago, I was on a trip to Europe, and I met a man my age, a few years older than I was, and we started to a conversation, where are you from? And he told me he's from Tomaszów. This man at the time was an Israeli diplomat, and his assignment was Europe. And we began our conversation about Tomaszów, and I asked him, tell me, have you been back to Tomaszów? He said, yes, I have been back to Tomaszów. I said, what have you seen of Tomaszów? He said, well, all there is left in Tomaszów today is a cemetery. There is no life. But he told me that he was able to find his house where he was born and raised. And he went to the municipality of Tomaszów, and he asked for the house to be returned to his family. After 4 or 5 years of negotiation with the Tomaszów authority, the municipality of Tomaszów, they told him, yes, you can have the house. However, since this house has not been, no taxes were paid for that particular property for all of those years, they gave him a bill which exceeded 20 times the value of that house. Being a smart guy, he said, I tell you what, I will donate this house back to the municipality of Tomaszów. However, my sister and I would like 24 hours in the house to ourselves, since we remember that our parents had buried some jewels and silver and gold in this house. So the authorities said, come back within 2 days. When they came back within 2 days, the house was completely demolished because they were looking for those gold and silver that was never there. And he felt that was justice. Now there is no house for him, his family, nor for the municipality of Tomaszów. So my travels took me from Poland to Germany, to Berlin. And we first came in to the Russian zone. Berlin at the time was divided into 4 zones: Russian, French, British, and the American. Our goal was to get to the American zone. And finally, we arrived in the American zone, and we lived in a DP camp, a displaced persons camp. Now, today we hear a great deal about refugees. There are Palestinian refugees. There are all kinds of refugees around. But the Jews, after the war, had no place to go. After any given war, there are refugees, but soon all of the refugees are able to go back to their own homeland. But for the Jew, there was no homeland to go back to. I told you what happened to me when we came back to Tomaszów. Poles did not want us. I think there is a poem that was written at the time, which I like to share, which kind of symbolizes and expresses the feeling how the Jews felt right after the war in the DP camps. It is called Wohin soll ich gehen? Where shall I go? I'll read it in Yiddish and translate it. Wohin soll ich gehen? Where shall I go? Wer kann entfernen mir? Who can answer me? Wohin soll ich gehen? Where shall I go? Es ist verschlossen, jeden Tür. Every door is closed for me. Es ist die Welt groß genug. The world is huge, it's big. Nur von mir ist sehr klein. For me, the world is very small. Wohin soll ich gehen? Where shall I go? Es ist verschlossen, jeden Tür. Every door is closed for the Jew. In the DP camps, it is the first time that we had a sense of freedom. There was a police force that was Jewish. There was a school that was Jewish. It is the first time that we were introduced to books of knowledge. I remember attending school in the DP camp. It was called Bet Sefer Amami, a national school. The teachers were Holocaust survivors, and also teachers came in from Palestine to teach the young children Hebrew, German, and Yiddish. I was in 3 different DP camps in Germany: Berlin, Ulm, and Fernwald. Fernwald was a large camp. There's a picture right here of Fernwald. This is what the barracks or the housing looked like in Fernwald. Fernwald was a very unique DP camp. In Fernwald, the Jews had established their own way of government. And also, life began to develop once again for us, people who came back from Russia, those who survived the extermination camps, and those who were hidden during that particular war. Fernwald was very special. As a child, I remember playing football, which is called soccer today here in the United States. But there was a very unique thing about Fernwald. I remember the first wedding that I attended as a child. My mother had, in addition that my father was in the lumber business, my mother was a seamstress and had a shop. And she and a few other women organized a sewing group. They got some material and they sewed 6 wedding gowns. 6 wedding gowns. So when a young woman put on that wedding gown, 6 young women walked behind her, carrying a wedding gown. Each gown symbolized 1,000,000 Jews that died during that time. I remember that scene where you see a young woman walking in a wedding gown and 5 other bridesmaids carrying those gowns down the aisle. Even today, as I speak about it, I have tears in my eyes and a broken heart when I see these people walking down the aisle carrying those gowns. Those gowns represented 6 million innocent people who died in the Holocaust. This is a picture of me in 1947. I was in Berlin in a school. This was my class. In 1947-48, when the news came to us that the United Nations have declared the separation or the division of Palestine into 2 states, a Jewish state and an Arab state. We were marching, and the young man or the young child blowing the shofar, that's me. That is me blowing the shofar as we were demonstrating in Munich, Germany, for the creation of a state of Israel. The young man carrying the picture of Herzl, the founder of modern Zionism. This is again, it's right here, that's me. In 1948, 47, 48, in a line where we were trained marching and how to defend ourselves if we go to Palestine to help in the creation of the new state of Israel. The education in the DP camps were very intense. We had to catch up of 10 years of lost time in a very, very short period of time. I have the first Bible that was given to me, which I carry and have it with me. It's right here. It's in Hebrew, Chumshei Torah, the Holy Bible, printed by the Bad Hatzalah in Germany. But this is a very, very special book because the inscriptions of that book are very unique. Let me read it to you. The remnants of Israel that survived the great destruction brought upon our people by Hitler, the shattered remnants, the Sherita Pleita, were weakened physically and spiritually. It was the great task of the Vat Hatzalah has undertaken the rebuilding and the revitalization of the Jewish people and soul. Our program of bringing life again to the great storehouses of books, of knowledge and learning will always be with us. We are therefore dedicate this Holy Bible to the President of the United States, Harry S. Truman. It's hard to read, but this Bible printed in Germany by the Wat Hatzala in Munich in 1947. Do you want to get a close-up of it? This is the Hebrew. This is the English. It's hard to read because of the American flag. It's gratitude. It's gratitude of what we are as a Jewish people and what we do. After the war, we came to the United States. I came to the United States in 1951 on an American ship. It was a Army ship, a Navy, that brought us to New Orleans. And in New Orleans was the first time that I was introduced to certain foods. I was 15 at the time. First time I saw a banana. We did not have bananas even in the DP camp. I peeled the banana, I ate the outside, and threw away the inside. And I said to myself, what a crazy country this is. Here we are in the United States. What kind of food is that? It was only later that I was informed that you eat the inside of the banana, not the outside of the banana. One other thing that I have to share, which I share with students, is how deprived we were. The first time I saw a urinal in the DP camp, I was so excited because I saw water. In the past, if we wanted to drink, we would put our face in a river or melt down some snow, and that was the water we would drink. When I saw a urinal, I put my face into the urinal and started to drink that water because I didn't know any better. This is how deprived we were as children of that particular period of time. But the hope that we had in the DP camps, the hope that we had living through Tashkent, living through the period of time in Siberia, it is a hope that one day we will be free and one day we'll be able to establish a home and have children and grandchildren. A poem that became very popular as the Song of the Partisans became almost like the national anthem of the Jews in the DP camps. It was written by Hirsch Glick, who wrote it in 1943. In Yiddish again, Sognis keinmal als die Geist dem Letzten wächst, Chotsch Himmelen bleien verstern blaue Tag, kommen wird noch unser ausgewehte Schau, es wird a Punkt gein unser Blut, mi sennen da. We must never lose our courage in the fight. Those skies of lead turn sunshine into night. Because the hour for which we yearn will yet arrive, and a marching step will thunder, we survived. Yes, we survived. Yes, we built new homes. We built a country in Palestine, but yet we can never forget that particular period of time. A priest who was led to the concentration camp in Dachau wrote the following in his diary. First they came for the mentally ill, and I said nothing. Then they came for the Jews, and I said nothing. Then they came for the communists, and I said nothing. Finally, they came for me, and there was no one left to say anything. A lesson for the future. A lesson that when we see injustice, we must act. A lesson for the future. When you see somebody hurt, you must help. And with this in mind, I had chosen a field of social service. I came to this country in 1951 without speaking English. We landed in Phoenix, Arizona in July or June of 1951. After 1 year in Phoenix, my parents put me on a Greyhound bus with 3 sandwiches to go to the big city of New York to attend yeshiva. I was given an English name when I came to Phoenix. My Yiddish name was Shia. When the social worker met me at the train station in Phoenix, she asked me, "What is your name?" I proudly told her my name is Shia. And she said, "Well, with a name like Shia, you're not going to get anywhere in the United States. From today, your name is going to be James." So for 1 year when I lived in Phoenix, my name was James Gortler. When I arrived a year later to New York, and I had my exam with Rabbi Sachs, who examined what level of Jewish knowledge I had and where I would be placed in the school, I told him very proudly, he asked me, "What is your name?" I told him my name is James. In Yiddish, my Namen is James. Oder ihr könnt mich callen Jimmy. You can call me Jimmy. And he said, "What kind of name is James? What is your Hebrew name?" I said, "Well, my Hebrew name is Yehoshua." He says, "Oh, Joshua." He says, "From now on, your name is going to be Joshua. Your friends will call you Josh." So hence, from Shia to Jimmy to Josh to Joshua, here I am in Seattle, 40 years after I came as a young man to lead a small organization called the Klein Gallant Home. Prior to my leading this organization, I worked with a very interesting group of people in New York called United Help, that was authorized by the German government to get restitution money and build housing and services for the elderly. Someone heard about my work in New York and invited me to come to Seattle to head up a small organization called the Klein Gallant Home. 40 years later, I'm here, developed an organization that has an international reputation of caring for the elderly. And that's what I've chosen, to care for people who are in need. I hope my experiences of the Holocaust taught me one thing, that the most important thing in this world is to speak out against injustice and help others in need. Thank you for listening to me.